All right, boys and girls, it's that time. Freedom Crossing, Margaret Goff Clark. We are almost done this book. Today we're going to read chapter 16, but of course we'll review our questions first. Yesterday you had chapters 14 and 15 I combined so that we can get the book done before spring break. So let's go over some of those questions. Keep in mind words, answers like I don't know and I don't remember don't get you any points, and I don't count as any credit. You need to try. You need to go back to the book. You need to reread to find the answers. You can re-listen to the videos. You need to try. Remember, you're supposed to be answering in complete sentences with capitals and periods. Again, these are your grades, guys. You need to take it seriously and try. And remember, when I'm done with the scores, I release them back to you. So check your emails. Whatever you sent it from is the same email it'll go back to, and you can see your score and any feedback. So make sure you're keeping up with that. Okay, so one of our questions was with head like a hair, like with a head of hair like a lion. What type of figurative language was that? Some of you just told me it's figurative language. I know that. What type, though? It's a simile. It compares him to a lion, two unlike things, and it uses the word like. The next question that you had to do was Laura says, have I been asleep for 4 years? And I asked what that meant. So I'm just going to go really quickly to the book where it said that. It says, have I been asleep for 4 years? Laura wondered. She asked herself why she hadn't thought about such things before. Uncle Jim and Aunt Ruth and their friends seemed to think it was natural and right that blacks should be slaves. And she had accepted their attitude without questioning it. That's what she means. Have I been asleep for years? I just accepted what other people said was true without thinking for myself, almost as if I'd been asleep, not aware of everything that was truly going on. The next question that you had to do was who was Frederick Douglass and what did he write? And again, that was right here in the book, page 118. Frederick Douglass paper. What's that? She asked. It's an abolitionist paper, Bert answered. You know, against slavery. It used to be called the North Star because slaves followed the North Star to freedom. It's put out by a man who used to be a slave, Frederick Douglass. So who was Frederick Douglass? He's an escaped slave. He's an abolitionist. And he wrote an abolitionist paper called the North Star. Again, it's all right here. According to Martin, Bert, and Laura, what are the rights of a human? Right here on page 119, it says it. I'll read it to you. It says, only what are the rights of a human being? Laura asked thoughtfully. To be free, said Martin. And to be treated with respect, Laura added. Bert suggested, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as the Declaration of Independence says. So, according to them, the rights of a human being are to be free, to be treated with respect, and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The next question that you had to do yesterday was to describe with specific details Laura's outfit as they plan the escape to Tryon's Folly. And if you remember, she needed to borrow Bert's clothes because her skirts were too long. The first pair of pants she got, the brown pair, were too long, and so she had to go up to the attic to get some clothes. And I'm trying to find the page, but we can see that she found a black pair of pants. Get to the specific page. She found a black pair of pants. Just a second. I can't find it right now, but she found a black pair of pants. She had to wear her shoes. She found an old shirt. She found a jacket from Martin. She found a hat of his, which she put kind of sideways. And yes, she looked like a boy. After that, I asked, since they won't dare take the road, describe Laura's plan for how they will travel to Tryon's Folly. And since they won't take the road, their plan was to go in the woods, but to stay as close to the road as possible. Also part of their plan, she said, if somebody sees us, you need to keep going. Don't wait for me. So now we have Laura and we have Martin, and they're going to try to get to Tryon's Folly and try to get free. And we are on page 131, Flight by Night. Do you think Laura is going to make it to Tryon's Folly with Martin? Do you think he'll be free? I certainly hope so, but let's find out. Grab your books and read along with me. Flight by Night. As she ran toward the woods, Laura's first thought was how easy it was to run without skirts. Boys were certainly lucky. Martin reached the shadow of the maple tree almost as soon as she did. There they paused. She was about to make a dash for the woods when she heard the clop-clop of a horse's hoofs on the road. A horse and rider came into view from the direction of Lewiston. Soon they were joined by the sentry Laura had seen patrolling the road in the front of the house. Scarcely breathing, she and Martin waited while the men talked, looking often toward the Eastman house. If the men glanced toward the backyard, would they see the two who were standing in the shadow of the maple? Laura thought not. She and Martin were wearing dark clothes, and Martin had the added advantage of a dark-skinned face. Moving cautiously, she pulled her cap low over her forehead and lifted the collar of the jacket to hide as much as possible of her white skin. I believe Martin and Laura are very brave right now. People are watching the house, and they're going to flee through the night, through the woods, to try to get him to freedom. Would you be brave enough to do it? Let's keep going. On the top of page 132. After the longest 5 minutes of her life, the men parted, the one on horseback traveling toward Lewiston, and the other one walking east. As soon as the sentry's back was turned, she and Martin fled toward the woods. Once under the cover of the trees, Laura paused to catch her breath. "Stay close to me," she warned Martin again. "We mustn't get separated. Hang on to the back of my jacket." She started forward slowly with a lantern in one hand and holding the other hand outstretched. A branch scraped harshly across her face, and she came to a sudden halt, clutching her cap to keep from losing it. Martin, close on her heels, bumped into her. Can you imagine through the woods in the dark? "I can't see a thing," she whispered. "I wish I dared light this lantern." "Let me carry it," Martin suggested. "Then you can use 2 hands to fight off those branches." They started forward again. It was easier, Laura found, now that she had both hands free. Also, as time went on, her eyes became more accustomed to the dark, and soon she could see the black trunks of the maple and beech and oak and the furry clumps of pine and spruce. Question number 1, what does the word accustomed mean as used in that sentence? Also, as time went on, her eyes became more accustomed to the dark. Back to the book. She began to regain the confidence she'd once had when in the woods. Now and then, a slight tug on the back of her jacket told her that Martin was with her. Top of page 133. The ridge road was on their left, and from the start she had tried to bear in that direction. By now she should have reached it. Were they lost already? Surely not. Not in these woods she had once known so well. Then, to her relief, she heard the rumble of carriage wheels not far off. Martin pulled at her jacket, and she knew he, too, had heard the carriage. Moving toward the sound, she saw ahead of her the white band of the road, gleaming dimly in the starlight. Seconds later, a horse and carriage came into view, traveling at a quick pace. Even in the faint light, Laura recognized the horse. It was Sally. Someone was on the carriage seat, leaning forward to urge the horse on, but Laura couldn't make out his features. The carriage passed, the two hiding in the woods, and Laura was about to move on when a horse and rider came pell-mell down the road after the carriage. She heard the rider shout, "Hello, where are you going?" A voice answered from the carriage, "Down the road a piece. What business is it of yours?" "That looks to me like the Eastman carriage, the one that kidnapped the runaway this afternoon." "That it is," the men in the carriage admitted. "It turned up on Center Street not half an hour ago. So the sheriff asked me if I'd take it back where it belongs. No one's home at the Eastman place but the girl, and she's asleep. Sam's been watching the house ever since young Bert was picked up. The light went out in her room some time back." So, clearly they think Laura's sleeping. Their plan so far is working. Sam must be the sentry who had been patrolling the road in front of the house, Laura decided. "I heard about Bert," said the man in the carriage. "Well, I'll put this rig in the barn and give the horse a bag of oats. No need to wake the girl." Thank goodness, because she's not there. Laura leaned against a tree, waiting while the horse and rider cantered past on their way back to Lewiston. Martin whispered, "Too bad we can't get that carriage and ride to the river." "I wish we could, but we're safer in the woods. Too many people were abroad tonight," Laura thought. The carriage would surely be stopped before they could reach Tryon's Folly. "I know," Martin agreed. "Well, we'd better move on." Keeping the ridge road in sight on the left, they pushed ahead, making good time until they neared a farmhouse. At their approach, the the farmer's dog set up such a racket that his owner came outside to investigate. The dog ran directly toward the woods where Laura and Martin were standing, afraid to stir lest the crackle of dry leaves and branches betray them still further. On the top of page 135. They could hear the man call, "Come back here, Rupert! I'm not chasing after any porcupines or skunks tonight." But Rupert was persistent, and finally the farmer gave in, saying, "All right, you win. I'll get my gun." Hearing this, Laura and Martin waited only until the farmer entered the house for his gun. Then they ran as fast as they could. In spite of her fright, Laura tried to keep her bearings. Their only hope was to stay in sight of the road. Although her memory of the land around Lewiston was coming back to her, she knew she couldn't find her way deep in the woods at night. The barking of the dog proved to be a guide as well as a spur, for it helped Laura to lead the way in a wide circle around the farm. She and Martin pushed on until they fell to the ground, completely out of breath. When the pounding of blood in her ears stopped, Laura listened for the dog, but silence had descended on the woods. "Now I know how you felt when the bloodhounds were after you," she told Martin. "They're worse," he said. "They make that awful howling noise, and you know they never give up." Top of page 136. Martin sat up and examined the lantern, to which he had clung all through their wild night flight. "It's still whole," he said. Laura struggled slowly to her feet and walked unsteadily to the edge of the nearby clearing. "We've come around to the north of Lewiston," she said. "Mohawk Street is over there." She pointed to the left. "So if we go straight ahead, we should reach the river." She didn't want Martin to guess how worried she was. The trip was taking longer than she had expected. What if the boat had already come and gone by the time they reached Tryon's Folly? In a few minutes they came onto the river road, across from Judge Stowe's estate. Laura felt encouraged. This last part of their trip had gone quickly. "We're almost there," she said softly. "Praise be," answered Martin. They hurried north in the shelter of the trees, for Laura did not dare cross the road at this point. Judge Stowe's land was too open for safety. When the dark mass of woods near Tryon's Folly lay opposite them, she whispered, "We're across here." The road was empty in both directions, so she scurried over with Martin beside her. They had barely reached the other side when hoofbeats clattered out of the drive of Judge Stowe's and came down to the road toward Tryon's Folly. Martin dropped to the ground and lay motionless, while Laura crouched beside him. Now the horse and rider were approaching more slowly. Laura could see a piebald horse, and atop him, the tall shape of Walt. Had he seen them dash across the road? To Laura's relief, Walt continued down the road. Phew! With a whispered word to Martin, she stood up. Stepping cautiously, she led the way through the thick undergrowth until they reached the comparative openness of the lane. Here she paused to listen, and with dismay and fear, she heard the crashing sound of someone hurrying through the woods behind them. Walt must have seen them after all. Laura could think of only one thing. She must get Martin to the river before the slave hunter caught up with them. "Come on," she urged. Martin obeyed, and in 2 or 3 minutes they burst out of the woods and into the narrow clearing at Tryon's Folly. With a backward glance, Laura ran headlong toward the house. Martin's feet pounded after her, and together they dashed into the parlor. Bats whirled over their heads so close that Laura could feel the air stirred by their flight, but she had no time to be afraid of mere winged creatures. Top of page 138. By the dim light that came through the high windows, she rushed through the rooms to the kitchen. She flung open the door to the cellar. "Here are the stairs. Put your hand on the railing." The darkness seemed to reach up to smother them. Laura felt as if she were descending into a well. Behind her, Martin gasped, "Where are you?" "Here," she tried to sound calm. "Give me the lantern." She placed it on the floor, pulled a lucifer from her pocket, and struck it. In the flare, she could see to open the lantern and touch the wick with the flame. She jumped to her feet, crossed the door in the west wall, and then pulled it toward her. Ahead lay the short tunnel that sloped down to the next cellar. "Come on," she started ahead with the light. "Watch out for the stairs at the end of the tunnel." "Yes, Miss Laura," said Martin. Laura heard both fear and bravery in his voice. "Just a little further," she encouraged him. "You'll soon be crossing the river." They were in the second cellar, and Martin had the trapdoor raised when Laura, pausing to listen, heard a door open someplace upstairs. Footsteps thudded far overhead. It sounded as if more than one person was up there. Walt must have a deputy or another slave catcher with him. We're at the top of page 139. Laura exchanged a terrified glance with Martin. Close the trap door and hurry! She plunged down the steps, stumbling and almost falling in her haste. Frantic with excitement, she glanced desperately around the third cellar. Where is that trap door? She asked herself. Only this afternoon she had been through these cellars, but now in her panic, she couldn't recall where the entrance to the next cellar was. Martin snatched the lantern from her hand and scurried around the room. In a moment he had located the trap door in the floor, beneath the windows that faced the river. Swiftly he raised the door and set the lantern on the floor and stood aside, waiting for Laura. Go ahead, she whispered. Down there you'll find a door on the side of the cellar toward the river. Run out and hide. Martin scrambled down the ladder, while Laura seized the lantern and turned to climb down after him. Her foot found the top rung of the ladder, and she reached for the trap door. To her horror, she heard footsteps enter the room she was leaving. She had no time to lower the door. Below her, Martin warned, Watch out for the last rung. It's loose. Top of page 140. Directly above her head, someone asked, Is that you, Martin? Surprised, Laura looked up into the dazzling light. The person who was holding the lantern asked in a puzzled tone, Laura? Such relief flooded through Laura that she almost lost her hold on the ladder. The man in the cellar was Joel Todd. Thank goodness it wasn't Walt. They're so close. They're down to the fourth cellar. They're close to the riverbank. Last chapter. We'll read it tomorrow. The Promised Land. I hope he makes it. We'll find out. All right, boys and girls, get your Google Forms done, and I'll see you soon.